Hello, this is Dialogue Talk. Today we have an exclusive interview with Getachew Reda, member of Tigray Central Command. I am Abel Tsiga hosting the show. Getachew, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, let's start with a briefing on Tuesday by Tigray Defense Forces Commander-in-Chief Getachew Reda, which he said that Tigray Defense Forces have neutralized the joint military campaign by Ethiopian and Eritrean forces. Can you give us the general picture of the offensive?
Well, as the commander of the Tigray Defense Forces clearly pointed out, there was a plan that was being executed by the Abiy Ahmed and Isaias Afwerki since the 24th of August. The plan was an ambitious one. It had about 4 phases, and the fourth phase being the disarming of the Tigray Defense Forces. And it was slated to begin the Ethiopian New Year. So the plan was for the two forces to launch offensives that would cripple Tigray Defense Forces, and the expectation apparently was for Abiy's forces to make it to Mekelle on the 11th of September. So as far as that particular plan is concerned, it has been absolutely frustrated because their movement from the southern part of Tigray resulted in their losing more territory than they could possibly gain. Their offensive in Wag was off to a bad start. We in fact managed to inflict heavy damage on the enemy, and the enemy has as yet to find its rhythm when it comes to resuming its offensive. And Tsellemt with another front. Our forces took up a defense position. They evacuated Adarkai, and now they are taking up defensive position around Maliham, which is slightly away from Adarkai, but enemy's advances were stopped there. Enemy had deployed tens of thousands of people, not only members of the regular national defense forces, but also militia, people's militia, ill-equipped mostly. And the Eritreans joined hands with the Eastern Command, which was transported to Eritrea. It's a bit mind-boggling. They were part of Abiy's defense lines in Western Tigray, but they transported the forces to where they attacked from Eliabo, especially in the Badem Shiraro fronts. Our forces held their ground in most parts, but we had to make some tactical adjustments around Addis Azar to beef up our defense capabilities, which we are doing right now. And the other front was the Takeze front, the David front, where enemy was able to penetrate parts of the David and Tsalimoy, and in an engagement that took more than 9 days, we saw the deployment of more than 27 infantry divisions, infantry and mechanized divisions, and numerous tens of thousands, I should say, militia and Fano. Well, the Eritreans were also sending divisions in the Barahle front and taking up offensive positions in Rama, in Zalambasa front. So a very coordinated plan, which was meant to first put pressure on our forces in every front, and at the same time stretch us beyond our capabilities to defend our positions. So the result was that in the southern part of the campaign, we were able to push enemy forces beyond Tigray territory, and our forces are within, in the northern Amhara region. In fact, there have been counteroffensives by enemy, wave of counteroffensives, waves after waves. We have been able to neutralize them, inflicting heavy losses on the enemy. The Eritreans deployed more than 24 divisions in support of. So essentially, the operation was a joint operation by the Ethiopian and Eritrean forces in Adiabo. But their hope and expectation was for the Dedebit front to crumble, so that forces from Tzelemt, from Dedebit, and from Adiabo could join and march all the way to Shere, and then, of course, the Rama and Zalambasa part of the engagement would then kick off, and then the Eritreans and the Ethiopian forces would move deep into Tigray and take over Maqala on the 11th of September. It's not just ambitious; it's absolutely ridiculous for them to assume that their movement would be a cakewalk. Of course, it wasn't a cakewalk. In fact, in 2020, December, Tigray had only less than 10,000 police officers carrying Kalashnikovs defending it. It took them a month to occupy most of the towns in Tigray. Of course, it took us another 3-4 months to reorganize, to regroup, to train ourselves and reoccupy most of Tigray. And now, with the Tigray Defense Forces having proved their mettle in successive engagements and battles, in fact, once taking over almost half of the country, with most of our forces occupying territories north of Debre Birhan, even threatening to march on the capital. To assume that Abiy and Isaias would be able to penetrate deep into Tigray, put Tigray under control, and disarm the Tigray Defense Forces within a matter of 2 weeks was obviously a harebrained scheme, but they had put every effort into it. So what we have now is the situation we have now is in the south, enemy forces look like they have lost steam, because after waves of counteroffensives, they haven't been able to push us an inch away from the territories we have occupied. We don't intend to occupy those territories forever. We are mostly interested in making sure that Abiy realizes that a military solution is not feasible. And second, in the Tzelemt front, we have stopped them on their tracks. In fact, we are in a counter-offensive mode. And in Adiabo, same thing. Strangely, one of the largest and probably idiotic offensives was the one that was launched in the Dedebit. We're talking about 27 divisions, a minimum of 3,000 forces each. including, of course, on top of that, you have Amhara Fano and militia, which were mostly forced into fighting with 16th century guns. It defies military logic why generals, army generals, who are supposed to know the basics of military science would deploy close to 90,000 people within a 90 square kilometer area. And obviously they were trying to use human wave tactics to overrun our defense lines and then take over Shire and then march from Shire with the support of Eritrean forces all the way to Magala. So yesterday morning we had completely crashed the David front with tens of thousands killed and wounded and thousands more captured. The rest, tens of thousands, are retreating in this area. What makes that engagement particularly more gruesome is enemy was training its artillery on its own forces. They were cornered within a 90 square kilometer area, and our forces were not only defending their positions. When we start launching a counter-offensive, the only way through which they can escape is the Takaze, the Debit bridge. But the enemy made sure that bridge was within artillery range, and people were not allowed to even escape. They were being mowed down by their own forces. When in the first place, it is the generals themselves who failed miserably to come up with a plan that would make sense. They didn't come up with a plan that made sense, and then the people couldn't do anything about it. They were being mowed down by our forces, and at the same time they were trying to retreat, but they were being mowed down by their own forces as well. And I would say an equal number of people were killed by their own forces as much as they were killed by our forces. It's very unfortunate, but at least the largest part of the offensive was in the Debit front, and it crumbled completely yesterday. So we have thousands captured, thousands killed and wounded, and there are also thousands who are retreating. I'm not sure if they will be in a position to regroup them and send them back again, but that's a different story. And still, for the first time in the last 23 days, today there has hardly been any military movement on every front. Not active fighting today. Whether this is because Abiy and Isaias are taking some time to regroup and relaunch their offensive, which they are likely to do, or whether they are giving peace a chance, remains to be seen. But for the first time in the last 22 days, 23 days, today there was no active engagement as such. Otherwise, the last 23 days we've been fighting a very tough fight, and we have held our ground in many cases, especially in the case of the David in the southern part of Tigray, even Tsellemt in Adiabo. We have shown to the enemy that going to Magala was never a cakewalk, will never be a cakewalk. In fact, to that extent, we have frustrated their dream. But it doesn't mean they will stop, because they assume that this is an existential sort of engagement for them. They have to win this, and despite their protestations, otherwise Abiy and company are not interested in peace. They want to resolve this militarily, and their second round of the genocidal campaign is off to a bad start, but I don't think they will stop there. And tomorrow we would expect fresh initiatives by the two regimes. Already Abiy is sending what is little left of his elite units, the Commando Republican Guards, to Eritrea. On top of what he had already done, the Eastern Command is already in Eritrea. They are transporting them. The Ethiopian Airlines is busy transporting troops. They are using the Humara Bridge, the Umm Hajar to transport troops. Obviously, Abiy has outsourced everything security to Isaias Afwerki. What will come out of it will remain to be seen. This is pretty much where we are as far as the military engagements go.
So, what can you say about the total loss, political and military loss, by the Ethiopian government in the fight?
Well, the political and military loss are more or less intertwined. When you have a regime which has already made T-shirts, millions of T-shirts available, where they proclaim New Year in Maqala, I mean, the entire New Year in Maqala paraphernalia simply means it has to be shelved. So they have to look for another date now. So it could be Maskal in Maqala, it could be Timkat in Maqala, it could be Fasika in Maqala, it could be whatever in Maqala. So these people keep shifting the goalposts. I mean, it's harebrained in every sense of the term. For people who at least have a rudimentary knowledge of military, to assume that they can barge their way into Tigray when Tigray, unfortunately for us, has one of the strongest militaries in the region now. That's plain stupid. So they have created an expectation on the part of their supporters that it would be a cakewalk, but it has proved that it's not a cakewalk. They have lost tens of thousands of people. I mean, I'm not talking about just thousands. The number of prisoners of war that we have now in and around Maqala, in many parts of the country. I mean, we're talking about an entire command, thousands of prisoners of war. Any military within their right mind would assume that their plans have fallen through if they see that thousands of their people are captured or taken prisoners of war in a single battle. These people wouldn't care a hoot how many people lose their lives. And obviously, they don't care about people's lives. In the debate alone, we're talking about 90,000 souls stampeding. Is that fighting? Is that an offensive? Stampeding to fight, stampeding to live, but being victims of gunfire from both sides. We're fighting to defend our positions. So by doing so, we end up killing people who are fighting against us. And those who are stampeding to live are being mowed down by their own people. That claims the lives of tens of thousands of people. It's very strange. But at least the first plan has been frustrated. And politically it means these people's idea of achieving their objectives militarily has fallen through. At least the first chapter of it has fallen through. Because they promised to their supporters and their members alike that they will be in Maqala on the 11th of September. They are not. Today is 16th of September, I guess. So their entry to Maqala is 6 days long overdue. That joke aside, militarily speaking, the Tigray Defense Forces have captured more armament the last 23 days than they had in the past. So we have captured more guns, more munition than the government cares to admit. So the military loss is staggering. And in terms of personnel, we're talking about tens of thousands of people. If we have 10,000 plus prisoners of war in a matter of 2 weeks, that speaks volumes about the fighting prowess of our enemies. And of course, thousands more killed, thousands more wounded. And they will tell you hospitals in Amhara region, health centers in Amhara region, even the stadiums in Amhara region is full of wounded people. So that loss militarily cannot be overstated. Like I said, the losses are closely intertwined, but the point is, these people won't stop at nothing before they could snatch some sort of victory from us. Whether that happens or not is a function of whether we will stand our position, not whether they have that intention or not, because they always had that intention, and not everything they are going to achieve is going to depend on their intention. It is going to depend on whether or not we are able to put up an effective resistance, and we will.
All right. And the government of Tigray last week has announced that it is ready to participate in an EU-led peace process. And yesterday, Ethiopian Deputy Prime Minister Demek Mekun has said that his government is also ready to participate in the EU-led efforts without mentioning your call. Why do you think Ethiopian government is hesitating to reciprocate your calls?
At the end of the day, the Ethiopian government realized that it will have to come to a negotiating table. What I personally believe it is trying to do is to go to negotiating tables with an upper hand. If they succeed to come to Magala and disarm us, and then they will say it's a fait accompli, there is nothing to negotiate over. We've been magnanimous enough to offer this or that chance, and then they have failed miserably, and then that's all there is to it. That they would have liked to say, but it's not meant to be. Now, they want to go to a negotiating table sooner or later, but with an upper hand. And they have been deploying thousands and thousands of soldiers, sending them to their certain death in the hopes that they would gain some upper hand militarily. It's very unfortunate. They are not likely to get that upper hand either. I don't know what Demek has said, but from our discrete channels of communication, the expectation was that they would at least agree to, because they had already expressed argument. What they were hoping was that we would say no to an EU-led process. So as soon as we said yes to an EU-led process, because we had never said no to an EU-led process in the first place, now they don't have a plan B. It was never their intention to go for negotiations, as long as they felt they could get away with another military adventure. So with the support of the Eritreans, they would try to steal some sort of victory, but they have been telling the international community that they are ready for an EU-led process, that they could go anywhere, any place, whatever, anytime, without preconditions. And now that we're saying, okay, we're ready for a cessation of hostilities, and then for an EU-led process, looks like we have denied them the pretext or the excuse to prevaricate on the issue of negotiations. And now they are scrambling for a plausible answer. And in the meantime, they are trying to inflict as much military loss on us as possible, so they could go to the negotiating table with an upper hand. But it's not going to work, because if their efforts the last 23 days are any guide, there is little in the way of hope for them. Because if they cannot achieve what they wanted to achieve by deploying 100,000 plus, we're talking about the entire Ethiopian military is now deployed in Tigray, around Tigray. Some of it, more than 30,000-40,000 of it is in Eritrea. Maybe in Eritrea they will serve as Isaias's Praetorian guards. Whether they are going to make a difference militarily in the battlefield will remain to be seen. They obviously will keep shelling our towns, try to make moves, but we will still stand our ground. Yeah, whatever their calculations are, we have shown them that military solution is not an option. So I cannot really speak for Abiy or the Mecca, but we insist that talking is the only game in town. Shooting is not working.
Your announcement has also said that the efforts should be led by mutually agreed mediator. What does it mean?
I mean, you know, why would it be about a certain individual? Why would this peace process be about an individual? He's been assigned to lead a negotiating, to mediate negotiation. And if either of the parties has misgivings about him or her, it should not be about him or her. It should be about the two parties, right? It should be about creating peace in Ethiopia. You know, what Abiy and company has managed to do is to make sure that this whole discussion about who leads the mediation degenerates into a confidence vote on a certain individual. Far from that. What we are saying is an AU-led process should be a robust process, should be a process that creates confidence within the parties themselves. It should be a process that involves observers or guarantors that will make sure that either of the parties would not renege on their promises. It should be a process that ensures that in the event of an inclusive political dialogue, you know, the whole question of rehabilitation, the whole question of post-conflict reconstruction has international underwriters. You know, the kind of process, robust process that should inform that it's not about people meeting together. It's not what Americans would call kumbaya diplomacy, where you get two adversaries to say hi to each other, to greet each other. All of a sudden, all the conflict will be gone. We are dealing with a very complex reality on the ground. We are dealing with a political malaise that involved various actors. How are you going to tell the Eritreans that what they are doing will have consequences? And there needs to be powerful players involved in observing the process. And they should have a stake in the outcome of the process itself. So what we are saying is the AU-led process should not be about Mr. Faki Muhammad saying this or that. It should not be about Mr. So-and-so saying this and that. It should be about clearly understanding the complexity on the ground and trying to take stock of the sensibilities of the parties and to make sure that the architecture, the governance of the negotiations process itself takes care of this challenge in such a way that people will focus more on the outcomes than on how it's done. Well, yes, how it's done is going to be equally important. By who it's done is important, but the most important is whether the process itself is robust, whether the governance structure of the negotiations itself is something that instills confidence among, not just among the parties, but also among the larger stakeholders. So these are the kinds of things we are recommending for the AU-led process to have.
Okay, but despite all these efforts, Ethiopian government conducts these drone attacks repeatedly, including the Wednesday drone attack that killed 10 civilians and injured several others. So what can you say about its political implication?
The political implication for anyone who cares to understand is that the Ethiopian government is not interested in peace. To the extent that it is interested in the language of negotiations, it is because it's fashionable to talk about peaceful resolution to the conflict, because the international community wants to listen to that. And you know, Abiy and company, in their smart alecky way, would have you believe that they are ready for an AU-led process, that they are all for Mr. So-and-so. They are ready to talk without preconditions, and yet humanitarian access for them is a precondition. The restoration of services is a precondition, because they assume that we will say no to an AU-led process, because they assume that we'll give them. I mean, you know, they were coming up with a very ridiculous argument that the fact that we haven't publicly declared the name of the people who would represent Tigray simply shows that we're not ready for peace. Now that we have declared the lead members of the team, they are left with nothing to say. So they have to go on creating all kinds of apocryphal stories. In fact, going ahead with their disastrous adventures, trying to change the facts on the ground. And I don't think they are going to change the facts on the ground. We believe there is no chance they can change the facts on the ground. If they cannot change the facts on the ground in Salimo and the David with a 90,000 plus strong contingent, I don't think they would come up with any magic wand to reverse their military debacle anytime soon, with or without the support of the Eritrean regime. The Eritrean regime is probably counting on the Ethiopian soldiers to protect itself from any potential backlash from us. We're not interested in going to Asmara. We're not interested in who is in charge of Asmara. We're only interested in making sure that whoever is in charge of Asmara doesn't threaten our people. We're not interested in who is in charge of Addis Ababa. We are only interested in who is in charge of Asmara, Addis Ababa, to the extent that whoever is in charge of Addis Ababa is threatening the safety and security of our people. That's the most important consideration we have. That's pretty much what I can say. Otherwise, drone attacks will continue, offensives will continue. What difference will it make? They will kill more children, they will kill more women, they will kill more innocent civilians, they will destroy what is left of Tigray infrastructure. Yeah, we'll have to rebuild Tigray from the ground up once the dust settles, and it will.
In a statement by European Union that was issued to condemn the drone attacks, and the AU accused the Eritrean government of impeding the peace efforts. How do you think the AU should manage the case of Eritrea once it reached at this conclusion?
Well, I mean, it's long overdue. I would like to honestly express my gratitude, our gratitude to the EU for its principled position on these issues. It's been consistent to a fault. It has been calling out the Eritrean regime on what it does. I mean, it was invited by the Ethiopian authorities to conduct mass killings, rapes. It was part and parcel of the genocidal campaign by Abiy Ahmed and company. The EU has been consistent. It's, you know, the American government came out with a statement which is commendable because it called on the Eritreans, it decried the re-entry of Eritreans into the conflict. It's not a re-entry of Eritreans into the conflict. The Eritreans have been there all along. You know, to assume that it was all of a sudden, it was a sudden decision by the Eritreans to join their erstwhile friends in Addis Ababa 2 weeks ago, that missed the boat. You don't simply jump into an offensive without prior planning and everything. We have every reason to believe that the Eritreans, in the first place, they had never left Ethiopian territory. They had occupied Tigray territory, which is technically Ethiopian territory. The international community should clearly, squarely blame the Eritreans for what they have been doing. They have been part of this genocidal campaign against the people of Tigray. They are not here by accident. It's part of a design. And it's a good thing that the European Union has called them out. And there are some individual European countries which still think Isaias Afwerki is salvageable material. I don't know why they think so, but I think it is EU as a body which has clearly, which clearly understands that Eritrea is not part of the solution, but part of the problem, and it needs to be called out on that. And I don't exactly know how the Europeans could manage Eritrea. Eritrea, at the age of 3, had already fought with all its neighbors. That's what they call it, precocious talent in English. I mean, a small kid doing wonders. Eritrea at the age of 3 had already went to war with most of its neighbors. And it's been exporting violence since. And, you know, it's now trying to, I mean, Eritreans had always denigrated the African Union. They nearly did everything to sabotage IGAD. They did everything to antagonize anything and everything African. But they would have you believe they are doing it because they are more African than other Africans. The Eritreans are the problem child of the region. And they need to be told to stop. In our case, what we are saying is they need to be told to stop. We want the Ethiopian government to call on the Eritreans to be part of the solution by withdrawing from sovereign Ethiopian territory. We don't expect Abiy to use force to force Eritreans to withdraw. In fact, it's sending divisions after divisions to Eritrea so they could attack us from the Eritrean side. I'm not losing sleep over the prospect of success of that campaign. But it's going to have disastrous consequences because they would destroy more infrastructure. They would, that would result in the days of many combatants or non-combatants. But ultimately, they would not be in a position to crush us. That much should be clear. But for the international community to remain silent when Eritreans continue to wreak havoc in the region and to allow the Eritreans to get away with their crimes for the last 30 years and expect them to behave, that's absolutely irresponsible. But like I said, we have to thank and express our admiration for the principled position that the EU has taken. Eritrea needs to be told to stop. Now that Abiy Ahmed has outsourced his security to the Eritreans, the problem has become that much more complicated, but we'll see.
And, okay, and reports are coming out that Eritrean government is carrying a massive conscription, and it has officially called its reserve soldiers to join the army. What has this thing to do with the war on Tigray?
I don't know. Yes, it's conscripting more people, press ganging more people, calling on its reserves to join the army, which simply shows you that it is here for the long haul. It wants to crash Tigray now or never. What we are saying is we'll fight for our rights. We'll fight for our survival. And we would like to call on our Eritrean brothers and sisters not to make the stupid mistake of assuming that the geriatrics in the Eritrean government should decide their fate and their friendship and brother relations with their neighbors and with their brothers and sisters. We'll stand our ground and we'll defend Tigray. And will definitely prevail. Eritrean regime didn't fail to destroy us, not because of lack of forces, but rather because of our resolve to defend ourselves. And that resolve is there stronger than ever. And it's very unfortunate that it's press ganging what little is left of the Eritrean youth into the army. But if the fighting instances the last 3 weeks are any guide, in many areas, those press ganged into the fighting do not fight well. They take the opportunity to either hand themselves over to us or to leave their barracks. But it doesn't bode well to the continuity of the Eritrean state as we know it. Like I said, we're not interested in meddling in Eritrea's affairs, but in our efforts to defend ourselves, we'll do everything to make sure that Tigray is well protected from this reckless, marauding forces, either from Eritrea or from Ethiopia. That much the world should know. And again and again, we'd like to say Tigray will prevail and it will. Thank you.
All right, our viewers, this was all for today's edition. Until next time, bye-bye.